Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen and today I have a review of what I think is my favorite book so far of 2022. That book is Trust by Hernan Diaz. This book just came out May 3rd from Riverhead Books, and this is one that was actually on my most anticipated of 2022 list. I had seen some early buzz, very like macro level blurbs about how this book is about wealth and power in the 1920s from a Pulitzer Prize finalist. He has one other book, I believe, called In the Distance that I will be reading ASAP, but this is his new release, and so I didn't really know too much about what the story was about. All I knew is that it was this sort of like metafictional book about money. This year, a discovery I've had on my channel is I love books that play with the novelistic form or that are starting to question what the novel or the form of the storytelling is doing to tell an effective story. For example, this year I read Middlemarch by George Eliot, and I think that is the blueprint of that sort of style of novel that I love. Knowing that this is a book told in 4 parts that sort of questions the truth of the story that you're being told, I was very excited to see where this was going to go. And so I do think that there is some benefit to going into this completely blind, knowing it's about money and wealth and 4 different parts, all letting the reader find out what's going on, what's the truth of the story here. But I do think that me kind of giving you some more insight into what this book is about, I hope to just sell this book to you because I think from, a general level, a book about money and wealth in the 1920s might sound a little bit boring, especially if you don't love historical fiction. I don't often read historical fiction, but this book completely, I was flabbergasted. I knew there were surprises coming, but the way it's done is so effective and it's so intricately plotted and just like in awe of how Hernan Diaz did this. It's just a masterpiece of storytelling, unputdownable. I'm just completely floored by this. I've never really read a book that had me feel this way before, so I don't know. Anyways, let's get into what this book is about. So the book opens on part 1, which is titled Bonds, a novel by Harold Vanner. So you already can tell this is a book called Trust by Hernan Diaz, and part 1 is its own novel. So I was already very intrigued to know that there was other parts coming down the line, and like what does that mean, having, an individualized novel at the start of a novel. We're getting meta already, but essentially it follows this couple called the Rasks. And first we follow Benjamin Rask and his development and how he kind of rose in fame on Wall Street and becoming a finance guru of sorts, understanding intuition, understanding the markets and knowing how to make money and how money makes money and being able to strategize and kind of get ahead of the market and be this sort of very like elusive and reclusive type of individual who becomes very very wealthy. But he also gets married to a woman named Helen Rask, and we learn about her and how these two characters are very eccentric, especially in their marriage. And by the end of the novel, you kind of see how Helen begins deteriorating mentally and how all that unfolds and how it ends up impacting Benjamin. So the novel called Bonds within this novel is really an exploration of money and wealth and greed and this look at kind of fallout of this couple. And so for me, when I was reading this, I knew that the other parts were going to sort of explore what goes on in this novel. And as you read the other parts, you start to learn the real story about the characters that are in this novel. And then we get to part 2. It's My Life by Andrew Bevel. Previous to this, we have no context for what that might mean. All we have is the novel to go on. And so what we quickly learn is that Andrew Bevel is Benjamin Rask. Benjamin Rask is Harold Vanner's fictionalized telling of the story of the life of Andrew Bevel and his wife Mildred Bevel. And so in this part, we sort of learn more about the truth behind Andrew Bevel, but it's told from his perspective. But what's really interesting about Andrew Bevel's telling of his own life is that it seems to be incomplete. For example, it's told from the first person perspective, but certain paragraphs are sort of end capped by notes saying more examples of his business acumen, show his pioneering spirit. So it's essentially like a draft of Andrew Bevel's memoir of his own life. And so you're reading it, you're trying to see the parallels between Andrew Bevel and Benjamin Rask from the original novel, see where the discrepancies might be. And so you're trying to see whether Andrew Bevel and his account is sort of responding to what Harold Vanner said in the Bonds novel about Benjamin Rask and try to figure out why did Harold Vanner write about this man in this way? Was he being truthful? Was he being deceitful? What is the motive behind that novel, etc.? So Andrew Bevel's section is sort of organized in terms of a memoir. We learn about early years, college, apprenticeship. Some sections are completely blank. So for example, we have college, just very high level notes, and then apprenticeship, nothing there. So it's an unfinished manuscript of sorts. Very interesting to read. So it's very mysterious as you're reading this. Like, what is going on? Why is it being told this way? And so I'll rein in on the spoilers from here. But what the third part does is we have another memoir. And this part is called A Memoir Remembered by Ida Portenza. And this is where the book really explodes and you understand what Hernan Diaz is doing here. This section follows Ida and her recollections of how she ended up working for Andrew Bevel and becoming his ghostwriter to write the memoir that we just read. And so what's so fun about this is you don't really know what is happening, essentially, when you're reading this book, but every single part in isolation is so endearing and very exciting to read. I mean, the first section, Bonds, the novel by Harold Vanner, is unputdownable. The explorations of what money can do to people and how it sort of operates in terms of the market and everything. Like, I'm not a finance person, but I thought it was so interesting how he uses this idea of money to explore these kind of weird and like reclusive characters of Benjamin and Helen to understand how they get to where they are by the end of the novel and Helen's deterioration and what that all means. But then once we learn about Andrew Bevel and his real life and what he's asked Ida to do in ghostwriting his own memoir, the revelations that come, honey, woo, it was wild. So I'm not going to spoil anything from here, but there's also a fourth part to this book that I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's a very brief little section, but this little section completely, it made me emotional. It was kind of poetic in terms of it being sort of more fragmented and spare in terms of what is being written in the section. That really sheds light on all three parts before it and really makes you question everything that was told to you before this. And so a book that I have not read that I hear this is similar to is Trust Exercise by Susan Choi, in terms of later parts of a novel sort of revealing things about previous parts. And I now really want to read that book to kind of summarize why I think this book is so excellent. And I think there's two quotes that are really telling of what this book is doing and why I think it spoke to me so much, aside from it just being a fun mystery of sorts in which you're trying to figure out what is the truth here. What can we trust in these tellings of each of the four parts to sort of understand what's actually going on with this couple? Who were they? Who is to blame for what happens to Helen or the real woman, Mildred Bevel? Who is to be held accountable? Why has Harold Vanner written this novelistic account and why is Andrew Bevel trying to attack it in some way? It's also this question of the power of fiction and how fiction can kind of become real life. How when people read the novel Bonds by Harold Vanner, how that ends up altering the perspective of Andrew Bevel and Mildred Bevel, and how the novel can really affect someone's understanding of the real world. I think it's a really interesting question of fact versus fiction and the power of a novel in the public's mind to alter their perceptions about real life things. And I think that's really interesting to see how, in conversation with current discourse around, for example, Bad Art Friend, how these examinations of the responsibility and morality of storytelling. Is fiction its own land where we can play in it to whatever extent that we want to? Or are there rules or boundaries to what we should be able to tell? And is there some sort of duty that's owed to the reader to tell them the truth behind real life events that are included in novels? Or is fiction its own playground? Writers can have any sort of autonomy that they want to tell whatever story that they want. And this book really questions those things in an interesting way, while also in a meta fashion having Hernan Diaz give you these four different accounts of what happened and let the reader sort of piece together their own answers to that question, which I think is so fun and so original for me to read. I think using a story of Wall Street in the 1920s and the Great Depression and money and capital, while also playing with the novelistic form, money being this tangible object that can buy you real things while also being an intangible system that's created to perpetuate power imbalances and greed and corruption, balancing those two things, and like how can a novel also lend itself to power and corruption and altering the minds of its readers through artifice, through something that's not real? Replace the term money with a novel. What is a storyteller in their autonomy? What power does that have to sort of contort the form in any way that they see fit? What truths can you hide and what should you reveal through the art of fiction? And it's really interesting how he explores that here. And I was just so floored and really helped me appreciate even more the power of one, just a good story. I mean, the first part of this book, I would buy that on its own. And in the novelistic telling of this, that book becomes a bestseller. There's a sort of like classical sensibility to this book that makes it feel to me like an instant classic. I would not be surprised if this wins many awards. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and I can totally see this winning the Pulitzer Prize next year, just from its one, innovative use of the form, also exploring American history and the Great Depression, and this idea of capitalism as the bedrock of American identity. I think it's really fun how he uses the novel to explore these things while also exploring the form itself and I can definitely see him being rewarded for that come Pulitzer Prize season, is one that I cannot wait to revisit. I think this book is a masterclass in subverting the reader's expectations, while each section uses a new voice and a new style that shows his control over the narrative. And there's a running idea in this novel about how successful storytelling is this blend of the intellectual and the emotional. By the end of this book, and with the reveals that happen, I think it does that spectacularly. I think this book is at once incredibly smart while also being very critical, indicting capitalism, and also thinking about sort of familial betrayal and the ways that people co-opt other people's stories and the impacts that that has, and the emotional resonance that has for people, I think is really phenomenally done. So all that to say, I think this is the best book I've read so far this year. I've never had a reading experience like this one before. I can't stop thinking about it. I couldn't put it down once I picked it up, and I implore you all to read it as well. I think it's a magnificent piece of storytelling that I think everyone can get something out of and will push your brain a little bit to understand or explore the power of narrative while also exploring the power of money underlying all of that. So I hope that sells it for you. But if you've read this one, if you read Hernan Diaz's first book, I would love to know your thoughts on that. And if you read this one, please send me a message, leave me a comment, and let me know what you think of it, because I think many people should take a chance on this, and I think many of you will love it. So with that, I will leave you, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye.